All cities have their history, their stories, their legends. New York, that city full of skyscrapers, could not be different. Long, long ago, when New York was nothing more than a handful of small houses and farms, the stories tell that there was a character named Rip Van Winkle. This gentleman was one of those people that life passes them by without them doing the slightest because they despair of having a fortune. Rip had a good character and was always willing to help whoever asked him, but as we said, money did not move his ideals, and with a plate of food and a good nap he was more than paid. As long as he didn't have a responsibility to tie him down, he was content. Rip, however, had the bad idea of getting married, and I say bad idea because his wife was always busy maintaining the house and the small garden they had, and thanks to that they did not go hungry at home because our friend was unable to provide what they needed necessary for your family. However, she did not stop ranting against Rip Van Winkle, and with good reason, because she was the one who maintained the home while Rip wandered through the mountains, went hunting with his dog, or took long naps under the trees in the summer, or had long conversations in the village tavern. Rip, as we say, was lazy. He even avoided his wife to avoid arguing. Well, arguing. The only one who spoke was his wife. He had no other choice, and it was impossible for him to run away from home. He was silent and sat in a corner to receive the reprimand. He did not even take time to answer. The laziness was such that he preferred to spend a long time listening to his wife tell her everything she thought about his way of being than to get involved in some domestic brawl. One fine spring day, listen, he took his shotgun and, followed by his dog, headed for the nearby mountain, with the intention of bringing some food for the house, and if he did not succeed in hunting, he would limit himself to a good long nap sitting under one of the huge trees that filled the slopes. He went up and up, hoping to find a rabbit, maybe a deer, or a nest of quail. Tired of walking, and seeing that nothing was presented to him that would incite him to hunt, he sat down under a leafy tree and agreed to take a good and pleasant nap. Closing his eyes, he began to get carried away by Morpheus, but after a while he heard thunder. He opened his eyes, but the sky was clear. Thinking that it was a game of his mind, he closed his eyes again, and in less than a rooster crows he heard the thunder again. He got up to take a good look at the horizon. Sometimes storms announce his arrival with thunder from afar. If that were the case and he managed to discover where the thunder was coming from, he could find some place to shelter from the rain. He climbed onto a huge rock nearby and searched the sky for signs of storm clouds, but nothing. As he was about to climb down from the rock, he saw a little man lumbering a barrel down the path. This caught his attention. What the hell would that man do with such a large barrel and those andurials? He was watching him for a moment, and seeing himself discovered by the little man, he greeted him kindly to indicate that he was a friend of his. The being stared at him, and Rip at that moment realized how strange his face was, with a beard that reached almost to his waist, pointed ears, and strange clothes that ended with a hat. Rip and little man looked at each other for a while as if they were analyzing each other. Both were surprised to have found themselves in such a lonely place. Suddenly the man cracked a smile and motioned for him to come closer. Rip did so. Helping others was one of his signs, and since it was getting close to lunchtime and he hadn't hunted anything, possibly the being he had found invited him to eat something that he carried in his saddlebag. The stranger motioned for him to push the barrel, and so they walked along the path for a long time. The truth is that Rip was of few words. But the little man didn't bother to talk much either, and they both made their way without giving each other more than sidelong glances and the occasional polite semi-smile. They came to a kind of cave more or less large that Rip had never seen in those places, and when he saw that the man entered it, Rip loaded the barrel on his shoulder and followed him. The noises of thunder and storm, far from moving away, were heard even closer. In a few steps, not many, the cavern widened and a huge opening appeared, giving way to a very strange place. Rip didn't know if he was outside or inside, because although it was brightly lit you couldn't see any sky. The plants were strange to him, and he was used to wandering in the woods, and he knew all the flora of those places, and the inhabitants of that place seemed strange to him, very similar to his companion. None of them were higher than his waist. They were all friendly and at the same time sullen and mysterious, with elusive looks, and when they stared at him they fixed their eyes on him as if searching inside him. Rip heard the thunder again, but this time so close that she seemed to be inside the storm itself, as if she were in the cave with him. She looked to where the noise came from and saw one of those beings playing bowling. Rip smiled, thinking that all the fear of storm really came from a simple game, but at the same time he wondered how such a wonder was possible. How could these little men roll a ball across the floor and make it sound like thunder? From what Rip could tell, they were having some kind of celebration. On one side you could see some little men preparing something like pots from which smoke and a rich smell came out. On the other side a few carried the barrel that their companion had brought and raised it to a platform with great effort, and suddenly the fight began. Music. Rip turned his eyes and saw three of those beings playing instruments that he had never seen before. Immediately the revelry spread through the place and the little men began to dance with each other and invited Rip to join the party. He didn't know when he began to dance, but the truth is that he couldn't stop dancing. He ate something from those pots and continued dancing. He drank from the barrel and danced and danced. Everything was laughter, joy, fun. When he woke up under the leafy tree in which he had lain down he felt his mouth dry, his body was stiff and he slowly stretched. What a strange dream, Rip thought. Did his legs hurt from dancing so much? Dancing? He thought to himself, but if it was a dream, how can I have soreness? When he got up, his head was spinning, it half hurt him and he felt an empty sensation in his stomach, all symptoms of partying. Rip scratched his head, very surprised at everything he felt. He called his dear and faithful friend, but the dog gave no sign of life. Rip thought that maybe he would have gone back to town when he saw him lying on the tree, but he would never leave him alone. Absorbed in all these thoughts he began to go down the mountain. After having walked for a long time, which seemed enormous to him, perhaps because of how tired he was, perhaps because of the bodily discomfort he had, or perhaps because he had really gone far into the forest, he finally spotted the town in the background of the road. But where was he? What town was that his eyes saw? Would he have taken a wrong turn? There was no other hamlet in those parts, but his dear little town. What was happening? What was happening? Was he still dreaming? He hadn't fully woken up? Would it have been true about the little men and they had him dumbfounded? Stunned, he decided to continue on his way to the group of houses to see where his steps had taken him. At least he would find people to guide him, and clear his mind a bit. As he descended the confusion increased. In the town there were many new houses, some small buildings and very little vegetation. Where were the trees that led to the town hall? Those leafy trees in which to take refuge from the torrid summer sun? Where was the tavern where Rip and his compadres had long pointless conversations? Where the radishes was his house? But which way had Rip taken? As soon as he began to walk through the streets, people began to look at him strangely. The townspeople had the same sense of strangeness in their countenances that Rip himself carried with him. A group of children approached him unashamedly, and a little girl held out her hand to help him walk, something that our man was grateful for, not knowing how the steps he took tired him greatly. Little by little Rip became the anecdote of the day, and with every step he took, more and more people surrounded him with a strange face. They accompanied him to the mayor's house and put him in front of the door. In a flash, the mayor came out, elegantly dressed and in a hurry to see what his fellow citizens were bringing him. "Tell me, good man," he began to speak, "what brings you to these parts?" "I'm Rip Van Winkle," he replied. "I must have lost my way. I can't find my town." Rip noticed how his words tired her spirits. His voice felt exhausted, without strength. When he said his name, a murmur was heard in the circle that surrounded him. The mayor's eyes widened in shock. "What do you say, good man?" he asked. Rip looked around to see if he could find a familiar face, or at least someone who didn't look at him so strangely. "I'm Rip Van Winkle," he said again. "I live in this town," he said, and scratched his ear in a daze. "Or at least that's what I think, and I don't know what happened because I don't know anyone. I can't find my house. Where are my wife and children? What has happened? What is happening?" Without knowing how, Rip began to cry. A great oath of astonishment was heard, and both the mayor and the older ones took a step back in fear at what they heard. Someone brought a chair, and Rip's weary bones took possession of it. What a relief he felt to be able to sit down. He hadn't realized how tired he was. The mayor looked in amazement at this old man sitting in the chair, with a long beard and a wrinkled face, who said his name was Rip Van Winkle, a local who was part of the legends of the town. According to that legend, the man with the same name as the old man had disappeared many years ago, and no matter how much they searched all around, they never found him. His dog, which had always accompanied him everywhere, appeared in the forest where he used to go, and no one could never find any trace of Rip Van Winkle. Soon a woman appeared, all anguished, and she looked at him attentively. She approached the old man and looked directly into her eyes, and at that moment she fell unconscious. A great murmur began to be heard, and the mayor ordered Rip to enter his house, where they fed him, made him take a good hot bath, gave him new clothes to change into, and when he finally came out refreshed and clean, he found the woman who had passed out sitting in the living room waiting for him, her face full of tears. She jumped out of her seat and hugged him tightly. "Father," she told him, "I am Elizabeth, your daughter." "Elizabeth? But, if you were barely 5 years old when I went to the forest." No, father, it's been 20 years since you left." Rip didn't understand anything that was happening. What, 20 years? But if just that morning he went into the woods with his dog? What had happened? What was happening? Before the astonished looks of those present, Rip recounted everything he remembered since he left home: the tree, the noise of the storm, the man with the barrel, the walk, the cave, the other beings, the party. Everything, he told everything he remembered. At the end of his story, he looked at those who were gathered there and noticed the faces of astonishment and stupefaction they had. No one ever knew how to explain what happened to Rip Van Winkle. His daughter took him home, and our character lived his last years there. He rarely went out on the street because his bones were no longer the same, and he got very tired. He received visits from doctors who examined him, journalists who peppered him with questions, and curious neighbors who brought food with the excuse of sitting down with the old man for a while to hear his amazing story.